world we live in can be a minefield of confounding, confusing, and conflicting peaks and valleys. Have you found yourself exasperated and bewildered to the point that you threw your hands up in the air and declared, "I can't literally even"? Well, never fear, novices. Your postgraduate studies in life start here. I'll be your sage on the side for those ups and downs. I'm Professor Moose, and I'm going to help you learn to even. All right, stop what you're doing, because I'm about to ruin the image and the style that you're used to. I look funny, but I'm making money, see? So, world, I hope you're ready for me. Now gather round. I'm the new fool in town, and my sound's laid down by the underground. I'll drink a bottle of Hennessy you got on your shelf, so just let me introduce myself. My name is Humpty, pronounced with an umpty. Ladies, oh how I like to hump thee. And all the rappers in the top 10, please allow me to bump thee. I'm stepping tall, y'all, and just like Humpty Dumpty, you're gonna fall when the stereos pump me. I like to rhyme. I like my beats funky. I'm spunky. I like my oatmeal lumpy. I'm sick with this. Straight gangsta Mac. Sometimes I get ridiculous. I'll eat up all your crackers on your licorice. Yo, fat girl, come here. Are you ticklish? Yeah, I called you fat. Look at me. I'm skinny. It never stopped me from getting busy. I'm a freak. I like the girls with the boom. I once got busy in a Burger King bathroom. I'm crazy. Allow me to amaze thee. They say I'm ugly, but it just doesn't faze me. I'm still getting in the girls' pants, and I've even got my own dance. The Humpty Dance is your chance to do the hump. Welcome back, novices, for another quarantine edition episode of Learn to Even. So, quick update on quarantine, COVID-19, coronavirus, or just the Rona, depending on whether or not you're from the Mississippi Delta. Numbers of cases are going up pretty much everywhere. So why is that? Well, there's lots of people who just don't give a damn and aren't willing to continue to try and stay home or wear a mask. I am, at least as much as possible. So if you are one of those people who is, anti-mask and going out to bars and parties and restaurants and doing things like you'd usually do, you're an asshole. So, maybe think of someone other than yourself. Wear a mask. Stay home. The mask you wear is not there to keep you from getting infected. It's to keep you from spreading the virus. But it seems like I've had to mention this on every episode so far. So I'm not going to talk much about it anymore beyond this point. So today is the 4th of July, where there's about 15 minutes left in the 4th of July. I'm recording this on a Saturday night. America's birthday, the celebration of American independence, the declaration, the ratifying of the Declaration of Independence, was actually penned and adopted a day or two earlier. John Adams sort of famously remarked that he thought that the day of July 2nd would be a day that Americans would remember long into history. And of course, much like everything Americans, or everything American, he was just a little bit off. And July 4th is when we celebrate our independence. And American independence isn't just, it wasn't just groundbreaking because it was American. It was groundbreaking because it was relatively new. You didn't see many colonies that would break off from their, mother nation and become sovereign nation states in and of themselves. And it spurned on similar revolutions and rebellions, the break of colonialism in several areas throughout the world during that, especially during that history, that part of history. So it has been a hot minute since we've put out a new episode, and that's entirely my fault. Haven't felt like getting behind the mic for a while. I managed to injure myself. My doctor diagnosed it as a pinched nerve root in the L4, L5 lumbar region. The funny thing is, a couple of weeks prior, or maybe not even a couple of weeks, a week prior to this injury, I managed to move 2 refrigerators by myself using a dolly. One I moved from one room of our house to another. The other I moved outside down some stairs out into the carport so it could be hauled away. We purchased a new refrigerator. But my injury came from literally lying in bed, reaching over to grab my wife's weighted blanket next to me in order to pull it over me. And when I grabbed the blanket and pulled, that weight, that strain, that direction, that specific movement caused me to pinch a nerve root in my lower back. And I felt pretty stupid after that. So I saw the doctor. He gave me some medicine, but nothing super fun. And I started seeing a chiropractor. The chiropractor has done some adjustments and given me some exercises to practice, some other things like that. And in general, it is steadily improving. It's about to the point now where I don't know that I'll need to make return visits to the chiropractor as long as I keep up my exercises and judiciously apply my new signature scent, which is Bengay and Biofreeze. Not sponsored, but both of those products heavily endorsed by Professor Moose here at Learn to Even. So, in addition to putting off the podcast, I've been putting off other projects that I should have been working on. I've been putting off some paintings, but I recently finished one. I purchased some Yupo paper or Yupo paper. I'm not sure exactly how it's pronounced, but it's a synthetic paper that I've used for watercolor. I've done one painting with it, and it is not exactly what I want to work on, I think, in the future. I may give it another go round some other time, but I've found that it's fantastic in the sense that it doesn't buckle, it doesn't wrinkle, and that if you make a mistake, you can dampen a paper towel, as long as you're using watercolor, and completely wipe away and remove the mistake. You can remove all the paint. But that's also part of the problem with working with this material, is that the paper doesn't itself absorb water. And the idea with watercolor is that you take water, you mix it with a pigment that is mixed with some other type of substrate, something like gum arabic. It becomes a liquid state. You brush it onto the paper. The water soaks into the fibers of the paper, leaving the pigment on top, and then eventually it dries and the pigment is sort of locked into the fibers of the paper. So this other paper, it's almost like painting on glass or painting on plastic. The water doesn't soak in. It just sort of sits there on top. Depending on how much water you've used, if you've got sort of more paint than water, then it lays there in a thin layer of paint. If you're applying some type of wash, then it will actually sort of bead up and run off if you're working on an easel or some other vertical medium. So it's been a challenge, and so much of a challenge, in fact, that I've decided to put it aside, order some more traditional materials, because I have about 4 or 5 commissions waiting that need to be worked on. But also, my spinal injury has made it not impossible, but certainly not inviting for me to get into my studio and do some painting. I want to talk briefly for just a minute about spinal injuries. If you're like me, the day you turned 30, you realize that you were sort of on a gradual decline. And the day you turned 40, you realize that gradation of slope was not as gentle as you thought. So, for many years, I have been a big fan of ibuprofen. My doctor has encouraged me to put the ibuprofen aside and steer more in the direction of acetaminophen. And so, most joint injuries or most muscular injuries are fairly, even if they're painful, they're annoying. If you pull a muscle in your arm, you can, generally try to avoid using your arm, and it'll work itself out in a few days to a couple of weeks. Spinal injuries, however, back injuries are a little different. It's not just a pulled muscle in the back. That's part of it. But when you start messing with nerves, you're not just experiencing injury in one spot. The pinched nerve root that I have is causing pain. Or at least initially it was. It's very mild now, but it was initially causing pain in my lower back, and that pain travels along the highways and byways of the nerve ending. And if you've ever looked at how nerves travel throughout the body, they come out of the back of the spine, and they sort of wrap around and down. So when this area becomes inflamed, I feel the pain in my back. I feel it down the side and top of my thigh, and I feel it as it sort of wraps and coils around down the front of my calf below the knee. And there's no injury to my leg itself at all, but when I feel part of the pain, I feel all of the pain. And I had a physical therapist tell me once, I had a similar problem, different side of the body. And so they gave me a set of exercises to work on because I had a herniated disc, and the herniated disc was putting pressure on the nerve root. And if you don't know what a herniated disc is, your spine works. You've got vertebrae, which are bones, and in between the bones, you've got little fluid-filled sacs. Well, a herniation occurs when those bones squeeze together and part of that sac pokes out from between those bones. And if it pokes out against a nerve, now all of a sudden you've got nerve pain. So you've got trouble, down one side of your body or something like that. So the physical therapist explained to me that the exercises we were doing were to shift direction of the herniation. And I said, what do you mean? He's like, well, basically your nerve endings come out of the back part of your spine. If we can get that disc to bulge out in the front part of your spine, then you're going to find that pain goes away, because the disc is still bulging out, but it's not bulging out and poking against a nerve root, which I thought was interesting. It wasn't to, take the muscles and make them more, able to deal with the strain or things like that. It's literally like, you've got this busted tire, and what we need to do is take the busted tire and put it on the front of the car as opposed to the back of the car, which I thought was both genius and also a little bit unsettling. It's like there's not a lot we can do to fix your herniated disc. If you take care of yourself, it'll sort of go back into place over time. But if you're going to have it, pop out, it's better if it pops out going towards the front of your body than it would be if it popped out going towards the back of your body. So that's an interesting visual. So unless you've been under a rock and don't have any access to social media or any type of streaming service at all, you have probably become aware that Disney Plus has recently released the theatrical film or the theatrical version of the hit Broadway show by Lin-Manuel Miranda entitled Hamilton. If you have not seen it, please, please, please watch it. It is fantastic. It has received some criticism because it's not technically historically accurate. And let me go ahead and explain this. Hamilton was never really intended to be a history lesson. It's more historical fiction than anything else. It's been compared as akin to fan fiction. There are definite historical inaccuracies, but the message of the show within the historical context is still of great value. It's still sound, and it is still incredibly entertaining. I find, at least the first time I watched it, I was in rapt attention the entire time. I found a lot to appreciate and enjoy in almost a humorous sense for the first half, Act 1. And Act 2 is fraught with drama and tragedy and an exploration of these characters, these founding fathers. One thing a friend of mine pointed out, at least in this filmed version of the stage play, is that all of the roles in the play are played by people who were not of the ethnicity of those people in real life. So, basically there's about 3 or 4 characters in the entire musical that are Caucasian. The bootlicker, King George, a doctor, and a couple of other minor speaking characters, a couple of which are played by the same actor. And I think that it is, number one, it's absolutely intentional, and it's a fantastic way to let people who are who are essentially not white see the story of these people who were white and give them a way to appreciate it, that they might not otherwise have. This is supposed to be sort of a lighthearted podcast, and we've touched on some issues. We've also, we've spoken about Black Lives Matter and things like that. But, I think Hamilton does a good job of taking these characters and by assigning actors who are not of the ethnicity of the people in question, who were, like George Washington, for example, is not played by a white guy. And I think that it allows, people of color to see these characters as somewhat more understandable, somewhat more relatable than they would with, their factual ethnicity, sort of standing as a barrier between them. And I think that's great. I think, Lin-Manuel Miranda did an excellent job, both in casting the characters in the original production, and the Disney version does have all the original speaking parts played by their original the original Broadway cast. I think one of the things that the production does is it lets us know that, you know, race is not an important factor in the telling of a story unless the story is about that race. What I mean by that is that, you know, the characters of Hamilton and Washington, Jefferson, all who were, you know, wealthy, white, landowning aristocrats, some of which were slave owners, are portrayed by people who are not white in the production. And it allows people in a modern setting to sort of disconnect, but at the same time go back and reflect and realize, you know, how race has played a role in how we perceive history and how we think about these issues, political, philosophical issues that have unfolded over time. So in the play, in the musical, Lin-Manuel Miranda, of course, plays Alexander Hamilton. I don't know the names of all the cast members. There's Aaron Burr, there's Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson and the Marquis de Lafayette are both played by Daveed Diggs. And in the words of my wife, he can get it anytime he wants. And I would have to agree. He drips charisma. His smile is infectious, and I hang on every single word that he speaks or sings in the performance. I also really like the portrayal of George Washington. I think the actor that plays George Washington does a really good job of showing the gravity of Washington's position, the seriousness. You know, most of the other characters are sort of jovial or jocular at some point or another, but Washington is always not somber, but serious. There is a certain gravitas attached to the role, which I think, you know, reflects kind of the way that most Americans think about Washington. We tend to idolize George Washington as our first president, one of the founding fathers, leader of the Continental Army. And I mean, he and Jefferson and other people of that time, you know, slave owners, they were people. They were imperfect. You know, whether they were kind or cruel, whether they were, you know, if we try to boil people down to a core merit or a core flaw, a core virtue or a core sin, we are, you know, robbing ourselves of a richer understanding of those people, of the context and the time in which we live. As part of the Black Lives Matter movement, we've seen lots of changes. The Mississippi flag has been changed. There isn't a new flag yet. There's going to be a committee to collect options to adopt a new flag, but the Confederate emblem on the Mississippi state flag is gone. There have been a movement to get rid of Confederate monuments and military bases named after Confederate veterans. I think that's a good idea. I've never really understood why. Well, I take that back. I have understood why, but I, you know, have never agreed with why those people have been sort of emulated and supported. Lots of people say that, you know, tearing down these statues and changing things like this is erasing history, and that is simply not the fact. You know, we don't use statues as a means to teach history. That's what a history book is for. That's what primary documents are for. That's what history teachers are for. We use statues and other landmarks like that as a means of glorifying history, as a means of setting up an example, as a means of, in a way, worship. And there are more worthy people to worship than those people. So, we have to look at people like Jefferson. We have to look at people like Washington, who were slave owners. And we have to acknowledge, their bad along with those things that we celebrate them for. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. He was a statesman and a scholar, but he was also a slave owner. Jefferson owned over 600 slaves. Washington over 100 slaves at Mount Vernon. And, regardless of how they were treated, they were still regarded as property. It doesn't matter whether your slave owner, considers you family and thinks of you as family and treats you as family. If he doesn't go the extra mile and say, you're not a piece of property, you're a person, you're entitled to your own autonomy. But also, it's convenient for us in the modern day to apply our morality and our, ethical direction to historical characters and be critical of them. We have the benefit of hindsight. We have the benefit of revolution, and we have the benefit of, seeing how history has unfolded. And we have the benefit of being able to look back and go, this was wrong. It shouldn't have happened that way. While we ourselves are in the midst of dealing with our own issues, and 20 years from now, people will look back at us and go, that was wrong. They shouldn't have done it that way. So, I understand the desire to sort of smash those icons that we think of as ideal. But at the same time, we have to understand that nobody is really ideal, or nobody really ever has been, outside of, some religious figures, which I'm not going to, I'm not going to condone or condemn anyone for their, religious affiliation and their thoughts of who was and who was not a perfect person or a perfect example for humanity. But the people that we're talking about, the people in question in our history, we can acknowledge those things about them that were flaws, as well as acknowledge the contribution to the things that we benefit from, those ideals that they try to enact. In the musical 1776, Ben Franklin's character, discussing with John Adams, talks about how history will remember them. And Franklin puts it simply, who do they think we are? I mean, we're not demigods. We're just men trying to do the best we can in the circumstances that we're given. And, when you talk about politics, everything that happens is part compromised and part improvised. And politics is important. One of the things I really detest, one of the things that gets on my nerves and sticks in my craw the wrong way, is when people try to dismiss politics. When they say, oh, well, the left and the right, they're both wings on the same bird. Or, they compare, I saw a meme the other day comparing the two major political options for president as wavy lays or ruffles with ridges. and essentially saying that the differences between them are so minor that they're not important. And I don't think that is a wise or nuanced approach to look at politics. People say, "Oh, I don't like politics," or whatever. Politics is supremely important because people live and die by the decisions made in politics. When you're talking about the economy, you're talking about politics. When you're talking about the rule of law, you're talking about politics. When you're talking about, how people should be paid or compensated, what we can and cannot allow to happen in our society, how we take care of those people who are vulnerable, how we punish people who do not, conform to the laws that the majority of us agree upon, that's all politics. It is important because people's lives are either ruined or enriched by it. People live by it or people die by it. And I just don't find that funny. It is, if you want to be funny, there's lots of things to laugh at in politics, but dismissing it as not important is the laziest. If that's where you're going to go with it, then don't bother talking about it at all. Well, we've talked about a lot today. We have, it's just been a while since we have sat together. And I want to thank each and every one of you for sitting and listening to me ramble. And I realize that some of these are more rambling and some of these are more structured than others. But I like knowing that you're listening and that you're there. I would love for you to reach out. You can find us at Twitter and at Instagram, Learn to Even, LRN2EVEN. I'm Professor Moose. Thank you. God bless.